What is up, DramaAlert Nation?
Stop. For those of you who are blissfully unaware, everyone's favorite person to hate, DJ killer Keemstar, was recently heavily criticized in a rather lengthy expose published by Klein of H3H3 Productions. I know, I too feel some 2016 deja vu on the grounds of a Keemstar exposed video, as well as Leafy and Great being supposedly back. The video is an interesting topic of discussion in itself, but I think the more intriguing aspects of the situation can be found in the aftermath, in the fallout of a proclaimed content nuke, if you will. The video presented what is a seemingly rather strong case against Keemstar, detailing his doxing of people, which pretty much undeniably led to the swatting of fellow YouTubers, his incredibly immature handling of very serious situations, and his complete lack of empathy for victims of mental illness, as well as specifically his handling of the drama that arguably led up to Etika's death, which I will get somewhat into later. However, many of the points made can be attenuated with the addition of context. Obviously, not all the points hold water, and the video's content is very much up for debate, as the situation does not seem to be slowing down. I highly recommend watching the H3 video before this one, as it is practically inevitable that you will miss an array of context, as I simply can't efficiently and adequately cover all the ground that Ethan did in such a short amount of time, nor is it my intention to do so. Ethan does juxtapose things for the sake of embellishment and dramatizes a lot of the arguments he makes, yet it can obviously be argued that the allegations Keemstar is facing are rather dramatic, and I'd honestly have to agree. The issue arises with misrepresentation. I can't help but think that Ethan dramatically misrepresented certain situations for the sake of strengthening arguments and villainizing Keemstar. Ethan repeatedly reuses the same clips for the sake of strengthening arguments, and he refuses to establish accurate time frames. An example could be his criticism regarding to the doxing of Smile for YouTube, whom he fiercely tried to victimize. Ethan Klein pointed out that Keemstar doxed Smile for YouTube and went on to reinforce his point not by providing context, but by giving examples and underlining exactly how serious of an offense it is. It is my understanding of the situation that Smile for YouTube had consistently been harassing Keemstar in the months leading up to the doxing and had himself doxed numerous people in his Discord. Now, before you try to get me dropped from all my incredible sponsorships, I am in no way saying that this context even remotely exonerates Keems for his actions. Fuck no. What Keemstar did was despicable, but that he did this over some small petty internet beef, as Ethan leads you to believe, rather than with the context that it was on the grounds of harassment and the doxing of his friends, makes Keemstar seem like an evil sociopathic maniac rather than the impulsive, needlessly aggressive and irresponsible person I believe he truly is. Ethan does very briefly mention that Smile for YouTube had already allegedly swatted Keemstar, according to Keemstar, yet very quickly attempts to invalidate it. Nonetheless, I think presenting context honestly in a case that deserves to be treated with seriousness is critical. It may have taken away some of the punch that H3 very clearly wanted the video to have, yet it would make Ethan seem like a far more credible individual. Once again, Keemstar's actions are atrocious, and his handling of the case was, as evident, very dangerous. You can argue that the context isn't important to mention since it in no way validates his actions, but I strongly disagree. Leaving out consequential context for the sake of empowering a point is not a good thing, regardless of how deserving of ridicule the defendant is. Now to the point that had the most amount of people upset on both sides of the spectrum. Ethan played clips of Keemstar's interactions with Etika, and for the most part, albeit indirectly, very heavily implied that Keem is responsible for his suicide.
Jump off a cliff. Just jump off a cliff. If it's just a simulation, who cares?
Of course, hypothetical, but it is quite a coincidence when you consider that only 51 days later, that very same YouTuber jumped off a bridge to his death.
This claim was not directly stated by Ethan, as I'm sure a lot of people will argue, but he heavily implied that Keem is at least responsible for exacerbating and furthering the deterioration of Etika's mental health, which led a lot of Ethan's followers to the conclusion that Keem is responsible. Ethan made some good points about Keemstar's incredibly unprofessional and immature involvement in the situation. I very much agree that Keemstar's actions leading up to Etika's death and the backtracking that followed were entirely unprofessional, but if you genuinely believe that Keemstar is directly responsible for the suicide of Etika, a clearly severely mentally ill individual, your understanding of psychology and mental illness is comparable to that of a child. I don't believe that Keemstar is responsible for Etika's death, and I think it is incredibly foolish to claim that he is. Etika was a person who very clearly fought with an avalanche of mental issues, and it is undeniable that Keemstar's idiotic remarks may have contributed to Etika's declining mental state. Yet it is incredibly stupid that so many now want to hold Keemstar personally accountable. Mental illnesses are incredibly complex, and hand, the claim that Keemstar is solely responsible for the suicide of another person due to some very misguided attempts at humor seems frankly absurd to me. Keemstar's involvement in this situation is nothing if not fucking disgusting and should be heavily criticized. But to so heavily imply that he is directly, if even indirectly, responsible is absurd. It downplays Etika's personal issues to a huge degree and ironically removes nuance from a subject that Ethan criticized Keem for not respecting and understanding. Once again, information and viewpoints are actively left out of the discussion by Ethan for the sake of furthering a point. I know I've played the devil's advocate here, but it is undeniable that Keemstar has been a questionable character, and the same can be said for Ethan. The point here isn't that you should support one or the other. Don't harass, don't take this personally, don't be passionate about this dumbass internet beef. Think for yourself. And now I will come back to you once Keemstar has given his response, because as I'll discuss in a later video, it is crucial to give the accused a chance to defend oneself before any conclusions are drawn. Oop, and it happened. This is supposedly the first of 2 responses, and we should see the next one in a few days. This one focused on the Etika point. Daniel Keem made some decent points and rebutted certain arguments. He admitted to the tweets that were in poor taste, but obviously denies the allegation that he was somehow responsible for Etika's death. He points out that H3 had taken certain tweets and statements out of context and deliberately used them to further arguments that were more ungrounded than Ethan led on. I'm not gonna speak directly for the legitimacy of the claims put forth by Ethan and the defenses utilized by Keemstar, as it frankly isn't terribly relevant to the part of the story that I find interesting: the fallout of a content nuke. Very little of the information disclosed in the expose is new, yet it seems a large majority of Ethan's audience were unaware of Keemstar's transgressions, which is why it has caused such a colossal uproar in the community. And with that, new potential discussions come into view. Multitudinous people have needlessly been spamming Keemstar, some attempting to get him dropped from his Spotify podcast. At the same time, followers of Keem are ridiculing Ethan's mentions. Audiences on YouTube have always had the habit of falling entirely in love with certain creators. This is a platform that prizes amateur craft, and due to the content being primarily produced by one person, many viewers develop certain connections with the people whose content they enjoy. When a platform primarily used by kids and young adults so directly relies on its creators to present themselves personally and as individuals, it leads to an incredibly irrational, usually one-sided connection between audience and entertainer. This has in extreme cases led to YouTubers abusing their status and taking advantage of numerous people. But in this, as well as in most cases, it is simply used to exacerbate this situation, to harass the different people who are in the disagreement and to an extent try to rob them of their platform. Many viewers follow the creators they enjoy passionately, and with that, once a situation transpires that leaves said creator open for criticism, there is no shortage of people who will come to their defense, regardless of their innocence and/or argumentation. Audience involvement on YouTube is unlike any other form of media, but there is absolutely no reason for personal vendettas unless you are directly involved in the situation. Keemstar is a bit of an asshole. A lot of the criticism here seems legitimate in my opinion, but the portrayal that Ethan made cannot be solely trusted. This is where the viewers have to be careful and not rely entirely on the testimony of one person. Bad situations transpire when audience members lock on to the viewpoint of only one person. This video is clearly in no way meant to be a defense of Keemstar, but rather an attempt at encouragement for the spectators of this event to take a step back and reassess their position. I'm not saying anyone here is necessarily wrong, but for one to participate in a situation such as this one, clear thinking is highly advised. Keemstar is undoubtedly a spiteful person, and he is very much liable to criticism. He is the host of a self-proclaimed news organization that insists on reporting tragedies yet doesn't act professionally and never takes things as seriously as they should be. He is rather obnoxious, dangerously impulsive, and he should have stuck to the glorified gossip and ignored more serious topics. As for Ethan's credibility, certain hypocrisies have been proposed by a variety of my fellow commentators, but that's territory I won't dare to wander too far into. Instead, I'll redirect you to Turkey Tom's channel, whom I can understand is making a video detailing these alleged hypocrisies in a relatively near future. It is however safe to say that Ethan is far from a perfect person, and his viewpoint should most certainly be taken with a monumental grain of salt. What also speaks volumes is Ethan's attention to Keemstar sponsorships, which many people argue will open the floodgates and start a new period on YouTube where the most efficient attack is to go directly after a person's income. Asides, I find his attempts at manipulating information and presenting misleading context is a rather damning sign that he's not exactly of perfect credibility. This is not a war between good and evil, but rather a glorified piece of gossip that went way further than it should have, and involved serious yet impossible to back allegations. It is an incredibly biased situation between two manipulative, egotistical megalomaniacs. Both of these characters have shown their true colors in the past, but even regardless, they should be seen as separate viewpoints, and their argument's validity should be judged from an outside perspective. It's foolish to take sides with such certainty in a position as uncertain as this. No one should have the luxury of impunity because their audience adhere to mob mentality. Both sides are deeply unreliable, so all I ask is that you formulate your own opinion. Thank you.